And are you okay if I record your talk
No, go ahead, please.
on Zoom?
We actually have partners in Haiti who are wanting to hear your talk.
Okay, thank you. Well, I just want to thank you for inviting me. Pleasure, especially driving today, crystal clear mountains and green mountains, the way Haiti should look. It's not that green, unfortunately. I had a lecture prepared, but given that the small group is very informal, I thought I would just talk, just give you some sense of the history of the country, and then transfer it into current events. And the history of Haiti is in many ways one of the great histories of the world, so far as you know, that it was the only country where slaves, enslaved people, managed to have a revolution and eventually create the country. And that was in 1804. Now, that major achievement has been marred by a series of very long crises from the very beginning of the Republic up to now. So when we look at the history, you can understand why we had so many crises and so many contradictions in the country. As you know, Haiti was discovered, it was called Hispaniola, discovered, encountered by Columbus in 1492. By 1502, slavery was already established, but the vast majority of the slaves were indigenous population, they were called Untitled. That population was decimated by slavery. There were about 700,000 of them. By 1550, the population was virtually gone because of the viciousness of the slave mode of production. So Africans were enslaved and they came to Africa. But the first Africans to come to Haiti as slaves came very early, small group. They came in 1502. So that's a very long time ago. And the main production in Haiti explain also why slavery was so critical. The mode of production was the plantation economy, sugar in particular. And that required all kinds of very vicious forms of labor. And sugar became extremely important in the political economy of the world. And Haiti became a major element in that world economy. There are a few facts that I'm going to point out to give you the idea of the significance of Haiti in that world economy. It was the first producer of sugar in the world, as much as Jamaica, Cuba, and Brazil combined in the 1790s. It was the second trading partner of the United States. Over 10% of total US trade was with Haiti. Only Great Britain exceeded the economic transactions between the two countries. Now, the wealth of the colony, as I have said, based on the plantation economy and slavery. So you had a form of despotism, clearly, and it was very much based on a white supremacist order. But that white supremacist order had all kinds of visions. At the time of the beginning of the Haitian Revolution, dating back to 1790, Haiti was overwhelmingly a slave country. You had about 405,000 slaves. Then you had something like 30,000 whites, and then you had the so-called affranchis, or what people call the free colored people. They were free from slavery, but they clearly had status below the whites. Now, within the white population, you also had deep divisions. You had what was called the Grand Blanc, big whites, literally, that is to say the plantation owners. And then you had the Petit Blanc, those who were working, but they didn't have large plantations, but they were nonetheless within the white group, so therefore they had status. And then you had the affranchis. The affranchis, to a large degree, were people of my color, descendants of whites and blacks. And they had a special status, which I will clarify when the revolution comes, because there was significant tensions between the so-called affranchis and the slave in Haiti. Slaves themselves were also divided, deeply divided. There were what we call the Usal. Usal is essentially the group of slaves that had just come from Africa. They were not born in Haiti. And then you had what was called the Creole. The Creole were slaves who were born in Haiti. So you can see that there is a hierarchy that is deeply based on race, but also, and increasingly so, based on class, especially for the Haitian population. So 2/3 of the slaves were African born. So the rest were born in Haiti. When the Haitian Revolution began, it was to some extent, we should not exaggerate this, caused by the French Revolution in 1789. The French Revolution became power, and when France had its revolution, you had the rights of man that became critical to the ideology of the French Revolution, and that spread to Haiti. Not surprisingly, the whites who owned the plantations got none of it. That was not for them. The affranchis, that intermediate class of people mixed, they were supportive to some degree. They wanted their personal freedoms, their personal rights. They wanted to be the equals of the whites. Yeah, and the whites said, hell no, this is not going to happen. But they wanted to keep slavery. But as a result of the tension, the affranchis ultimately realized that if we are going to win this struggle, we need an alliance with the slaves. So from the very beginning of the Republic, you have those tensions, class and race, that continue throughout the history of Haiti. So when the revolution began, there were all kinds of intrigues between the different major powers, the British, the Spanish, and the French. And to make the story very simple, Toussaint Louverture, one of the key figures of the Haitian Revolution, and also really, in a weird way, the paradigmatic figure of the problems of Haiti. Toussaint Louverture was born a slave. He was free. When he was free, he was a slave owner. And then he became the leader to abolish slavery. So you have all of those tensions that are really encapsulated in the person of Toussaint Louverture. Toussaint was the leader of the revolution, and by the late 1790s and early 1800s, Toussaint had essentially taken over the whole country. But, and this is another of the contradictions, Toussaint was a general in the French army. An important thing to remember. And many of the people who are going to be very significant leaders of the struggle for independence were also generals of the French army. Now, what happens to Toussaint is that Toussaint wanted a very peculiar type of agreement. He wanted an agreement with the French whereby Haiti would remain in the French Empire, but would have full autonomy. He wanted the autonomy of Haiti. It wasn't called Haiti then. He wanted the autonomy of Spain. And one of the things that are interesting, like he would write to the French leaders, and eventually he wrote to Napoleon. He said, from the first of the blacks to the first of the whites. That's the way. He didn't want to be subordinated. But that was quite significant. Eventually, with the ascendancy of Napoleon, what happens is that the French want to reestablish slavery in the island. Now, this is something that Toussaint would not want. And this is something that led to the struggle for full independence. Toussaint was captured by the French in Haiti, sent to France in the northeast of France, not far from Besançon, and he died in the Chateau de Joux. When Toussaint was captured and sent to France and eventually died there, new leaders emerged who were already part of that cadres of people who had fought in the 1790s. People like Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Henri Pétion, and Christophe. Now, one of the issues, obviously, was you had to fight against a significant French army. There were about 50,000 French troops. Combination of guerrilla warfare and also tropical diseases contributed to the defeat of the French. So in 1804, Dessalines declares the independence of Haiti. Haiti becomes, actually it was called an empire, because he was the emperor. Now, one of the interesting things about Dessalines is that he was clearly a revolutionary leader, a major figure in terms of the abolition of slavery. But, and this is a persistent feature of Haitian politics, there was kind of a messianic vision of his persona. I mean, the very first speech like Dessalines gives as emperor and leader of a black independent black republic, he says the following: you, my people, you listen to me, otherwise you're in trouble. And I'm essentially paraphrasing, but that's the bottom line. And there was another major and significant problem for the Haitian leadership. The economy had collapsed, because one of the slogans of the revolution was "Bepet Kaseka." In other words, cut the heads and burn the plantations, which meant that the whole economy, which was based on sugar, had literally collapsed. So one of the fundamental contradictions for a very long time after independence was, how do you reestablish economic order in the country, given that you are, white supremacist order, and that Haiti is, for all practical purposes, but treated as producer. And until the 1840s, all Haitian leaders at that point, because if you wanted to reestablish the plantation economy, the production of sugar, you needed to impose forced labor in one form or another. So all of those regimes until the 1840s tried to impose what was called a code rural, which was for all practical purposes an attempt to reestablish forced labor on the population that had just fought against slavery and become emancipated. So you have a major contradiction. And what happens in Haiti, to make it very simple, the newly liberated peasantry became peasants. A small plot of land, and they clearly would not have done anything, to be returned to the previous status. So you have that first tension between the rulers of Haiti immediately after independence and the population. The other important element is linked to the beginning of a division in terms of class, because all of the cadres, the military cadres, generals and the rest, they pick the land and they got large, significant amounts of land for themselves. So the top brass, as it were, started to be differentiated from the vast majority of the peasantry, which is something that we still see in Haiti, deep class division, major inequality. That started there. The other thing that we find also at the beginning of the empire and the republic are divisions between Haitians in terms of race color. And that division was exemplified by the struggle between Dessalines and Pétion. Pétion was someone of my color, but there were tensions. And eventually, this is part of the Haitian history too, is the rather violent ways we deal with our leaders, how the leaders deal with them. And one was the assassination of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the first major figure of Haitian independence. He was assassinated, the country divided. On the one hand, in the south, Pétion was in charge, and in the north, it was Christophe. If you've been to Haiti, you may have seen, a citadel, which is a monumental thing on top of the mountain. And what is interesting too, is that while it's a significant achievement, it nonetheless was built on the back of Haitians in a very nasty way. So those are some of the contradictions. Then there is the other fundamental element of Haitian history, and that is the international connections. From the very beginning, Haiti is treated as a pariah nation immediately after independence. Haiti was the first independent Black republic. You have a system that is based on white supremacy. So Haiti is kind of marginalized. And you can see that, for instance, in the relationship between the United States and Haiti. That's an interesting phenomenon. Dessalines wrote to Jefferson asking Jefferson to have good economic relations. And he said, I'm not going to export the revolution to Jamaica or to Cuba, just Haiti. But Jefferson never answered. And Jefferson called, there's a long history of rather nasty words that Jefferson had for Haiti, but one of them is the Republic of Cannibals. That tells you the vision that he had of Haiti. Nonetheless, this is another one of the interesting things. When Haiti was fighting against the French, there was what has been called Jefferson's clause. Weapons could go to Haiti, French. And for good reasons.
We've seen that in other places.
Yeah. So, but what is interesting, and people won't make this connection, is that the independence of Haiti and the defeat of Napoleon's troops led to the Louisiana Purchase. Because Napoleon's idea was we stop in Haiti, we destroy those slaves, and then we move to Mexico. He couldn't. So in a peculiar way, the revolution of the cannibals led to one of the great achievements of Jefferson, that is essentially double the size of the United States. So those are some of the issues. Now, when I talk about foreign connections, not just the United States, you also have the French, obviously, and some of the other European countries. And I'll mention one thing that persists to this day. This is the kind of opportunistic convergence of interests between Haitian rulers and foreign powers. And now I'm going to give you two examples. One has been in the news. If you read the New York Times, this is the so-called Haitian debt that Haiti had to pay to the French the French indemnity. That happens in 1825. At the time, the president of Haiti was a fellow by the name of Jean-Claude Boyer. And Boyer was part of the Haitian elite. And since Pétion, there were negotiations as to how would France recognize Haiti. And eventually those negotiations materialized with the Boyer, but under also threat. The French came with gunboats in the harbor of Port-au-Prince, and they told Boyer, you either accept this deal, the indemnity, which is a significant amount of money. It was 150 million French francs. A significant amount of money. If you put it in terms of dollars of the 21st century, it's about $20 billion. It's significant. So the French threatened Boyer, but Boyer and the group that he represented, they wanted recognition as an independent nation. One, because they wanted the nation state to be recognized, but the other was clearly more in terms of their own interest. If France recognized them, that meant that the property, those fellows had significant property, would be recognized by the French as legitimate property of the Haitian elite. So they wouldn't be threatened anymore. So while the debt had very harmful consequences for Haiti for a very long time, some elements in Haiti had an interest in having that agreement. So again, there's that kind of opportunistic convergence of interests. Obviously, the Haitian ruling groups are supporting it, but they can manipulate their subordination to get something in return. And the debt was repaid. I mean, the indemnity itself was repaid by the late 1800s. But in order to repay the debt, Haiti had to incur into more and more debt. And that led to all kinds of problems in Haiti, and it was one of the things that led to the American occupation of Haiti from 1914 to 1934. And that occupation, I'm not going to concentrate on that, but the occupation is interesting because the Americans sent in the Marines because of the Haitian debt, so they tried to go to the central bank of the government. The Marines pick everything that is in the central bank, they transfer it to the bank in New York. That's the way it was, the way things went. So yeah, clearly. But I guess what I want to show you is that there are Haitian interests that are also connected to very powerful external forces. That's one example. The other potential example is the current one. This is the current Prime Minister, our Henry, who has never been legitimately chosen by anyone except the previous president, Jovenel Moïse, before his assassination in July of last year. But what is interesting is that Ariel Henry had been designated by Jovenel Moïse as the prime minister, but there was an incumbent prime minister. Initially, after the assassination of Moïse, the so-called incumbent remained prime minister for about 12 days. And he remained that because the international community, through a tweet, and I'm not exaggerating, you can go back to the tweet saying, this is the prime minister. But for whatever reason, about 12 days afterwards, they say, no. Oh, yeah, he's the prime minister. Now what, if you read the news last week, there's a fellow by the name of Daniel Foote. I don't know if you've heard of him. He was the special envoy to Haiti of the Biden administration. He resigned in protest against the deportations of Haitians to Haiti after the Mexico border last year. Well, what Foote says, I know very well why they pick our Henry. And he says it very bluntly. The US picked him because he was not going to protest the deportations. He was going to remain quiet. He used the term, he was malleable, full of malleability. So again, what you see, the connections between Haitian leaders and foreign powers. Haitians have agency, but it's not necessarily agency that we want for the food development country. So those are kind of big themes of Haitian history. Now let me plunge into the current period for 5 minutes and we can have questions. This is immediately after the death, the assassination of Jovenel Moïse. No one really knows what happened. Probably heard some Colombian mercenaries were involved, but clearly there were Haitian politicians who might have been involved, in particular the security forces. But we still don't know. There has been a very long investigation that has led to nothing. I don't think they want investigation between the outcome. But the assassination of Jovenel Moïse is a rather rare affair. The previous assassination was around 1914, and it precipitated the invasion of the United States. We've had violent rulers, but no assassinations. Even in the Duvalier period, where he died in office, from Duvalier left, then we had people who came to power like Wesley Manika, got killed. Roberto Maricil was not killed, Pilar was not killed, Martelly was not killed. So in other words, we don't have a history of assassination of people. So that was a shock to Haitians, even people who disliked Jovenel Moïse. And Jovenel Moïse was not the popular president. He had been elected with 55% of the vote, but only about 20% if you statistics, which are probably incorrect in any case, 20% of the population voted. So it's a very small number. And from the very beginning, he was perceived by the Haitian population as illegitimate. He had been accused of embezzling funds. There was a big issue about money given by the Venezuelans. It was called Petro Caribe. It was essentially money given to the government in the aftermath of the earthquake, and you're talking about something like $2 billion. And most of it was wasted. Most of it also, well, most of it, but part of it in English, went to the pockets of Haitian leaders. And Jovenel Moïse was targeted as one of those who had benefited from the embezzlements. The other thing too is that Moïse had promised elections never came. He wanted to prolong his term in office by a year. And that was against the Constitution and against the judiciary, what the equivalent of the Supreme Court in Haiti. But he remained, so he was quite unpopular. Now, when he was killed, supporters of Moïse said that he was a reformer, that he was attacking the oligarchs, etc. But at least from my perspective, that's not the case. He was part of the same group of people. He had been picked by the previous president, by the name of Michel Martelly. Michel Martelly was a character. He used to be a singer. He's called Sweet Meat. Very popular. Singer, flamboyant. I mean, he would disrobe publicly. I mean, it was really something else. But in any case, he became president. And that is also connected to international issues. And most Haitians don't understand why the US wanted Martin to become president. And clearly, that was the decision coming from Washington. There's a very famous moment when Hillary Clinton was the foreign secretary, goes to Haiti. She meets with the three people who are running for the presidency. One is Michel Martelly, the other is Madame Maniga, and the third, I forget his name. There were three. And the elections were disputed. No one knew who was in front. Actually, in the first count, whether it was correct or not, Martelly came in third, which meant that he couldn't go to the second. But then, suddenly, Martelly is number two, and number two becomes number three, and Martelly is the chosen one, and we have kind of a very fake election, but is elected president. And he picks nonetheless when he's leaving, and this is another very complicated story, because he almost was pushed out of power. But he picked Jovenel Moïse as his candidate. And he controlled the electoral council. Surprise, surprise, Jovenel Moïse became president. So, but nonetheless, the assassination is a turning point because it aggravates significantly the crisis in Haiti. There is no parliament, there is no president, there is no judiciary, and the current Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, is a de facto Prime Minister, who was not chosen by anyone but Jovenel Moïse and the international community. And Jovenel Moïse picked him illegally because he had no parliament where you could actually ratify the choice. And Ariel Henry has been in power for more than a year. And you've had negotiations between Ariel Henry and several groups, civil society, political parties, try to find the dispensation. One of the key groups is a group which is called the Montana Agreement. And Montana is a hotel in Haiti, and those are civil society people who got together, some politicians too. And they decided that what Haiti needed was a government of transition. And a government of transition that would last probably 2 years. The new constitution would be elaborated, and you would have also a modicum of order reestablished. So one of the things that it is besieged with now is the proliferation of gangs, very violent gangs. They control essentially downtown Port-au-Prince. They control also a very critical highway to the south. And that highway is critical because when you go to the south, that's where all of the oil reserves of Haiti are located. So they can cut that, which means that gas is no longer arriving in the capital city or in other areas of the country. So the gangs, in a bizarre way, were federated. We call the G9. And the amazing thing is that the person who gave the idea to the gangs of federating was Madame Lee, who was the UN representative in Haiti. The idea was that if you put them together, we can negotiate, which is a bit of a crazy idea, and it has been a crazy idea. Although the federation exists, the gangs are still fighting each other. But they're extremely well armed, better armed than the police. And they are controlling traffic. They are kidnapping, they're involved in extortion, etc. So you can't have any type of election when you have a country that's so deeply divided and in such a violent atmosphere. The crisis has also been exacerbated 2 weeks ago when Ariel Henry, and this is another one of his rather incompetent ways of dealing with problems. In the middle of the night, he gives a speech and he says, well, the subsidies for gas, for propane, are cut. So overnight, the price of gas doubled. The price of propane doubled. And you have an amazing level of inflation in Haiti. It's around 30%. It's probably high. In addition to that, you've had, as a result of the catastrophes, natural catastrophes that we had in the South last year, you have an extremely dire situation in terms of food security. It is estimated that something like half the country, something like above 5 million people, are facing difficulties, severe difficulties to eat. So you have prices in terms of transportation that are escalating beyond the imagination of the Haitian population. You have a crisis in agriculture. You have also the political crisis. So all of that combining leads to the type of explosion that we had in the last few days. People are fed up. They are hungry, and it's not surprising that you have violence and that you have looting. Now, clearly, there are certain forces that are manipulating some of those things. But nonetheless, it's a very understandable reaction of a population that is hungry, facing significant problems to revolt. And it's not clear what is going to be the solution. There are people in Haiti who talk about the Haitian solution to Haitian problems. This is a very nice slogan, but I don't see it materializing. Because even the people who talk like that are continuously talking to the external community about what they should do and what they should do for themselves. So this is a problem that has not been resolved. I don't see any immediate compromise between the different political forces. I've been hoping for a very long time that acute crisis might lead to some sort of outcome that would lead to some sort of solution, national solution. I thought about that in 1986 when Duvalier was forced out of the country. It happened. I thought that when Aristide came to power the first time, it happened, we had a coup. I thought that when he returned on the back of 20,000 Marines, that didn't happen. When Préval came, there was a semblance of something, but it didn't last very long. Then Aristide comes back again, and he's forced out. There's significant amount of violence. You have the occupation of the country initially by French and American troops, and then by the United Nations in Houston. That doesn't resolve anything. And then you have the earthquake, which is a massive crisis. And there I said, this is so bad that Asian rulers, whatever may be their strife, they will come together because this is a colossal event. 300,000 people die. The infrastructure of the country is destroyed. You have an opportunity to get some significant assistance, seize the opportunity to do something. We did it. Now, there is also the external connections that have messed up the whole thing. The history of the recovery after the earthquake is one where it's completely mishandled by international forces. Most of the money that was sent to Haiti did not stay in Haiti. Most of the money went to international NGOs and to what some people call the Beltway bandits further up. Yeah. So, and you know, the UN had a report, and in that report, they said that 75% of the money that was sent, the $3 billion, stayed, you know,
In Arlington.
yeah, essentially, I mean, the subcontractors, et cetera, et cetera. The government of Haiti received very little money. It received $25 million. Now, the idea was that the government is so corrupt, we can't give money. But if you don't establish the government and a strong government, things are going to fall apart. The rest of the money went to NGOs. The problem is that those NGOs have very few patients in them. They were foreigners. They didn't know the reality. And there was also some sort of very self-seeking development of people who go to Haiti, because there was money. So you have all of those problems that have besieged the country. Now, as I've said, I'm rather pessimistic. I'm not sure whether this crisis is going to lead to the kind of compromise between the different Haitian political forces. And I'm afraid that the very conditions that we have now may be actually conducive to another foreign intervention, another kind of occupation in some sort of the country. And I'm not sure that Haitians want it, but on the other hand, the rulers and the opposition, they have not managed to resolve their problems. This is ultimately inviting some sort of intervention. And if you read the newspapers, the Washington Post, I think yesterday or the day before, they had an editorial saying it's time to go in. Clear up the stuff. The Miami Herald at the same kind of editorial. So we are at a juncture where things do not look very promising, and even the foreign intervention would be highly problematic at this time, given that the countries who might be interested in, like they did previously with MINUSTA, Brazil, Chile, the United States, the French, they have other problems. My administration is dealing with Ukraine, Brazil is going to have an election, Chile just had a crisis about its constitution, the French have their own problems. So it is not clear at all what is going to happen. And while Haitians continue to want the Haitian problems, I have my doubts about that possibility. So I'll stop here and wait.
So what is your hope? You said you had a hope, you were sort of waiting, it didn't happen here, it didn't happen here. What is your hope?
It's not very significant. It's just having a government that is more accountable to the population, having some redistribution of wealth, having a government that is mildly competent and without corruption.
We've
This
had
is
that
not
hope.
like this is not a radical dream. It's a basic, and it's very difficult to establish. And to some extent, it's difficult to establish because of the severe poverty that we have. Because politics in Haiti, for those who do not have money, and that's a significant portion of the population, it becomes a business. You go into politics, once you're elected, you don't want to be replaced because there's money to be made. So it's kind of a vicious circle. And that's very problematic. The other problem is the international community. The policy of the international community, in my mind, have been a disaster. Haiti, up till the late 1980s, was very poor, but it could feed itself. It had enough rice, it had enough sugar, etc. Then the international community came and they privatized everything, they opened trade. So what that led to is that Haiti imports rice, imports sugar, imports virtually everything that it consumes and produces very little. The idea was to have cheap labor, ultra cheap labor, used so that you could have small industries that would export to the United States and to the rest of the world. That didn't work. You know, it simply did not work. So you need to, in my mind, what you need to do is basically accept that Haiti is never going to be that well. But it can be a country that can feed itself, change agricultural policies. It can be a country that has a modest industrial base. But it's going to be a country that is fairly poor, but with a decent life for everyone. That's complicated in Haiti because the groups at the top, they don't see that. And I know I come from that. So this is not their vision of Haiti. And if you keep that same vision, that, well, we are protecting our interests, that has disastrous consequences for the rest of the population. And that has led obviously to huge patterns of migration, because Haitians cannot make it in Haiti. And to a large degree, the situation is not even worse than it is because of remittances. Haiti's diaspora sends about $3 billion to Haiti. Without that, the country would be dire, absolutely dire. So you have all of those issues that are difficult to resolve. And I'm not sure, I don't have a magic wand either. So, yeah, it's kind of sad and depressing. On the other hand, sometimes in history, things happen that you feel you don't expect, that can shock you. And we've had that in Haitian history. Okay. For instance, the independence of Haiti is something that should never have happened. If you were cold, calculating, rational, and analytical of the situation, that it did. Now, it had problems with it, but it did happen. More recently, if you think about the Berlin Wall fell, no one expected. Not a single, and I know the academics, just, oh, I wrote, no one. The way it fell. And the very quick thing, how it happened. Those things are massive events that surprise people. So there could be something right. There could be, the possibility that out of this acute crisis, some rulers in Haiti say, okay, enough is enough. We are going to do something different. Because if you don't do something different, you're going to get the same results. See, Einstein said, if you keep on doing the same thing, it would be insanity to expect a different result. And that's what we've been doing since the fall of the Duvalier. And the Duvalier things were not good either. Nasty dictatorship.
What is the Dominican Republic do in this situation? I mean, what is their
Yeah, the Dominican Republic is allowed. And there's also real tension between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Because you have a large population of Haitians who migrated to the Dominican Republic. And the Dominicans do not want more Haitians. At least they don't want people from the lower classes. They don't mind Haitians from the upper classes. But the lower classes, they don't want. They are building a wall, actually. And they deported a lot of Haitians. There has been also that story of people of Haitian descent who were born in the Dominican Republic who were expelled because they were considered to be Haitians. So it's a very tense thing. The current president has said that the international community should do something about it because it's becoming not only a Haitian problem because of the problem of the Republic, but the problem of the Caribbean. So there is fear that what's happening in Haiti might have negative consequences for the Dominican Republic. On the other hand, the Dominican Republic exports a lot of stuff to Haiti. So there is a vibrant economic exchange. So I don't know what is going to happen, but the relationships are not good for all kinds of reasons. I mean, the Dominican Republic at one point was part of Haiti, then separated. Yeah.
So for, what is it, 10 years or so, group here in Virginia has been, and actually Roger Bowen's been instrumental in organizing groups all over the country through Episcopal schools and supporting schools in Haiti. Is it worth doing?
I think it is worth doing in the sense that you are improving the lives of small groups, but this is the contribution. I used to serve in a small NGO of Beyond Borders, which we work in
Sure.
And you're not going to change Haiti, but you're going to change certain communities.
Yeah, our
You're
goal
going
isn't
give
to
an
change Haiti.
opportunity to people who otherwise would have a miserable life. Young Border was involved in Haiti, we have a program so-called rest avec, in other words, people who are sent to families and really mistreated. And they've dealt with that, they've dealt with the education of young women, they've dealt with agricultural policies, so they've done a good job in Laguna, but it's a small community. But the people who are living in that small community are living very differently if Young Borders have not been. And what Young Border has done, which is, I think, the way to do it, is that the cadres are mostly Haitians in the country. Now, there are people obviously in DC raising money, those kind of things, but it functions with Haitians. So people have bought into that kind of group, and it makes a significant difference. And this was one of the problems with the assistance after the earthquake, because Haitians thought that they were excluded. Now, a lot of things were done given the catastrophe, but it didn't change the country. The only thing that was done really well was the cleaning of Port-au-Prince in terms of the massive debris that you had in the streets. That was done fairly efficient. It was done with Haitians, it was done with the United States, it was done with French. So there was a significant effort that managed to clear all of those areas that had been destroyed by it. But the rest was a catastrophe. You know, they built, there was the idea of building a new town for people who had lost their houses. They built it in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, middle of nowhere, no electricity, no running water, go there. Right? It becomes, what does it become? The sun. It's very predictable. So it's a rather bizarre thing that people can see. Maybe you do it once, but it's a repeated pattern of failures.
So the teachers at source are Haitians.
Mhm.
So I guess the hope that the long term, maybe there's some kids who are educated who become the next leaders.
Look, there's that possibility, you know.
And there's some stability in that community.
Yeah, it's like in Laguna. Laguna is extremely
Which
stable.
is all, which is what we were aiming for.
But you know what they do in Laguna? That's an island. You come boat onto a little plane. When you get there, you check your name. It's almost like a different territory because they do not want gangs. It's a sad comment, but it's a necessary thing. So you protect the community and they can continue to evolve in a positive direction.
Great. Professor Fatton, thank you so much.
So, most welcome. Thank you.
Roger Bowen is going to say just a few words about the Virginia Haiti Collaborative and how it got started. About the school before.
3 minutes. I prepared some remarks so that I could do those. We're going from Google Earth macro view, static macro view, down to a tiny little micro view, which involves us a lot. My name's Roger Bowen. I'm a retired Episcopal priest and retired headmaster of Episcopal schools, boarding and day schools. Here's our window into the reality you just heard. About 15 years ago, several Episcopal churches in this part of Virginia were asked by a Haitian Episcopal priest to lend him a hand with a little K through 8 school that he was struggling to keep open. It's located about 3 hours over rough roads from Port-au-Prince St. Mark's School, the École St. Mark in Circulasus in the Central Plateau region of Haiti. Our visits there, many visits before these last 3 years, showed us that the majority of Father Schneider Kulu, the young priest who is there, his people lack the basic things that we take for granted as essential for maintaining a good standard of living. We all know that. In a region where a large percentage of the people there are still unable to read, literacy really is a step toward self-determination. So schools and children are that Episcopal diocese focus. Every Episcopal church in Haiti is also a school. In fact, Haiti may be the largest diocese in the Episcopal Church. In fact, in terms of numbers, it is the largest, 80,000 communicants. Virginia is close, materially impoverished, but spiritually rich. So 60 Haitian Episcopal priests, like their Kulut, men and women and countless lay folks, work tirelessly in these towns and dirt-working countryside. They established and maintained 200 churches and 220 schools in Haiti. You travel by jeep and motorcycle and horse or foot to some of the outliers. They sometimes negotiate treacherous mountain trails and ford rivers. Our priest friend, Père Balut, oversees 2 other schools some distance away. They're thatched, some of them concrete block or tin buildings that serve as churches and schools, and sometimes clinics in their Haitian communities. About half of those Episcopal schools in Haiti have American partners, or used to, like us, but those are really declining a lot recently. We've lost American partners because of the pandemic years, of course, and now the inability to visit because of many of the reasons that Robert just enumerated painfully. Haiti's in the midst of a tragic free fall. It's quieter and safer out in the countryside, like at Circulasus, this little town. And our friends struggle along, doing the best they can, but the ramifications of the chaos in the cities and on the roads leading to the cities are felt throughout the whole country. And as Professor said, food scarcity is now really a huge issue for the whole country. So the story is not simple. But what I can say to you with absolute and unqualified certainty is that our support for the 350 kids at the École St. Mark these past 15 years has made a real impact on real families. Otherwise, parents couldn't afford even the small school fees. And our help occurs in the midst of that broader context that is tragic and dysfunctional and unjust. It's a context where progress is precious and bad news is ubiquitous. So it's like you put a candle in the midst of a well-lit room, but then place that same candle in the middle of a pitch dark room, and the light shows very, very differently. That's what we've been asked by our Haitian friends in this one tiny place. That's what we've been asked to do. We ache to get back there, of course, to look into our Haitian friends' eyes and they into ours, and we still feel like we are one. As my colleague Serena says, when we can't go visit, like now, we're missing, but we need to remember a little boy in the kindergarten who offers us his chair, or the baby in the pink dress that somebody in New York sent to Haiti, or the man in the woman's hat with the black rose on it who cries when he prays, or the beautiful singing that bubbles up during the prayers of the people, and the soul of the congregation just scrubs my soul, or the hero priests who hike miles, sometimes through the heat and mud and dust to their congregations without even losing the crease in the pants, the shine on the shoes. Or the first grade student who carefully wraps a portion of her school lunch rice and beans, and banana leaf. So she can take that home to a brother who cannot attend school, who has no lunch. And so we'd like for all of you, many of you are already, to consider joining us in keeping this little candle of ours, keep it lit, giving light.
Some direct request to that, a little bit of, a couple of other numbers. So up until a couple of years ago, this school, the St. Martin Circle, was for, I believe, K through 8. And a group of 5 or 6 parishes in the Diocese of Southwestern Virginia and the Augusta Convocation was providing about $40,000 a year to pay the teacher salaries to keep that school operational. They also paid to build the school. And you can look at their work on this website, Virginia Haiti Collaborative. Then a year or two ago, the school expanded K through 12. The budget went from 40 to about $70,000 a year. There wasn't that's because they wanted to serve those kids, not because there was suddenly an increase in support from a small group of churches and the Augusta Convocation. So a little bit of outreach was done. Grace actually got involved at that time through our Gadsden Fund. Last year, we were able to provide about a third of the budget from a grant, but there isn't a magical source for long-range funding of the school. In this fall, the father Hercules asked us, "What's your strategy? Can I ask for funding the school this year?" And really, it's been something that I've been wrestling with too, because to some extent the strategy has been prayer, and that's a good thing. But part of the strategy, of course, is all of you. And so these parishes have been raising, $3,000 a year, $4,000 a year. And then there have been individual heroes, contributors anonymously who step forward and sort of fill the gap largely. But that isn't going to source it going forward. And the Gadsden Fund isn't going to be able to come through with $20,000 a year either to source that. So the idea is, 350 kids, $70,000, $200 a kid. That funds the school.
$2,000 per teacher.
Or you want to do 35 staff, $2,000 a teacher. And so what we're looking for is to broaden the base, see if we can find more people who will give a little to supplement what the churches have already been able to do and want to continue to do. And what we hope is that you'll consider funding a student. $200, use the card to make your commitment. Maybe even talk to somebody else and see if they'll do $200 for. In our community, I think for a lot of people, $200 is something that we spend on Amazon, without too much of a thought. So we hope you'll consider this. If you want to go big, fund a teacher, $2,000. But we're interested in something sustainable and ongoing. We'd really like to have 350 people giving $200 a year, year in, year out. We'd rather have that. that's sort of the goal and the vision. We don't really need 350, maybe 150 would do it because we're getting some of the money through fundraisers. But we really hope that you'll consider a personal commitment of just $200, or if you want to do more, and to take it to your friends and neighbors and fellow parishioners and invite them so that we can broaden the base and meet the goal and tell Percolute, we've got a strategy. It's not going to work this month, but over time we're going to work it and hopefully be able this year and next year and the year after to be able to tell you your teachers will be employed. Now, it scared the hell out of me to hear that 30% inflation is going on in Haiti, because there's no, I can't conceive of how we will pay 30% additional salaries this year and then another 30% next year and another 30. But that's not what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to meet the $70,000 budget for this year at $200 a student. And that's the pitch. You've got the cards. I hope you'll take them home. You don't have to make a commitment tonight, but I hope you'll be troubled by it. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Yes, contributions can also be given online. Let me just show you. If you go to the
It's on the little card.
yeah, it's on this, but if you get on your phone and you go to Virginia Haiti Collaborative and you go to the donate button, and this is the way that I've done it. You can just go here. This takes you actually to Trinity Stanton. You're making a country. I think it'll come up. But when you fill out the form, if you give through this, you can use your credit card, you can make a gift, you'll go to Trinity Stanton. You will not get a tax acknowledgement. You can tell the federal government you made the contribution, but you won't get a tax acknowledgement from Trinity unless you're a Trinity member. If you want to make a contribution to your own home church, I know here at Grace, if you wanted to do that, we'll send the money, we'll give you an acknowledgement. Okay? And I think that's probably true at other churches. I'm sorry this isn't coming up as I expect, but it may be because my Google is paused. I keep having a sign in here. But anyway, you get the idea. It can be done online with some ease. Oh, I'm not gonna. And or you can mail a check directly to Trinity Episcopal Church using the card. Any questions? We're really grateful you came on a Friday night. Thank you so much. There's cookies and cheese and crackers and ham biscuits and Arnold Palmer's if you're willing to mix your own. There are the tables. Thank you so much for coming.
I didn't quite understand what you were saying.
NGOs.
You were NGOs.
I assume that's, yeah, it doesn't.
Things going well, very, very well.
Thank you.
Well, that's the thing here.
Where are you going?
Yes.
Yeah, I understand.
We gotta get the.
Plenty of pauses. Plenty of sweet pauses.
No question. No question.
Did you have a good cruise?
That was
Was it?
Yeah, well, it wasn't. It's kind of cold and windy and blowing. Not a place.
Shake it.
Small.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So sorry. I'm sorry. Applicants. I don't think we're gonna do it.
Hey, Mohammed, thank you. All right, I probably gotta stop this recording. Did we stop this recording?